Adeyemi Bakare was used to controlling any situation. Owner of a real estate empire, he was known for his confidence and ability to solve problems with a single phone call. But that day, as he entered the elegant restaurant, he felt a discomfort he hadn't experienced in a long time. The sunlight reflected off the skyscraper windows, and the streets were as busy as usual, but none of that eased the growing anxiety in his chest. As soon as he stepped into the restaurant, his eyes scanned the room for Ijeoma. She was already there, seated at a table in the far corner, away from the main hustle and bustle. Her red dress contrasted beautifully with her skin, and even from a distance, he could see the shine in her eyes. Ijeoma always had a striking presence, something that drew attention wherever she went, even though she wasn't in the same social position as Adeyemi. She had been a former servant in the mansion, and with all his charm and cunning, he had won her over just days after she was hired. They used to meet in secret, sharing intense moments. But that day, there was something different in her demeanor, something more serious. Adeyemi slowly approached her. When he finally reached the table, Ijeoma stood and greeted him with a quick but tense kiss. The air between them was heavy. Adeyemi tried to hide his nervousness, but it was obvious that Ijeoma had something important to say. "Adeyemi," she began, her voice low but firm, "what I have to show you couldn't wait." He frowned, his mind already running through various possibilities. Ijeoma had always been discreet, so he never imagined anything serious could be happening. With trembling hands, she reached for her bag. He watched in silence as she pulled out a small object and placed it on the table between them. Adeyemi looked at the object, confused for a moment, until his mind processed what it was. A pregnancy test. 2 pink lines gleamed, clear and undeniable. Time seemed to freeze. He couldn't take his eyes off it, his body growing tense as the weight of the situation began to sink in. "I'm pregnant," Ijeoma whispered, her voice almost inaudible amidst the restaurant's elegant murmur. Adeyemi blinked, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. His carefully constructed world seemed about to crumble. He imagined the disapproving looks of his colleagues, the scandals this would cause in the press, and above all, the disappointment on his father's face. "This can't be happening," he murmured, more to himself than to Ijeoma. "But it is," she said, her voice tinged with pain. "I didn't expect this either, but it's real." He shook his head, trying to find the right words. "We were careful," he finally said, as if that could somehow resolve the problem. "You were on the pill." "I was," she replied, her voice steady but her eyes reflecting the hurt his words were causing. "But no method is 100% effective. I know this wasn't in our plans, but now it's the reality." Adeyemi began to grow impatient. He glanced around, making sure no one was paying attention to their conversation. "Plans," he repeated, his voice slightly raised. "We didn't even have plans. This was just an affair." The words hit Ijeoma like a punch. She straightened up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "An affair," she repeated, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "After everything we've been through, after everything we've shared these past few months, you see me as just an affair? I should have known. Of course, you would never want a servant, right? How foolish of me." Adeyemi ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "You know what I meant. Think about it. You work for me. You know who I am. My family. What would this do to the business? It would ruin everything." Ijeoma stared at him in disbelief. "And what do you suggest I do? This isn't just about you or your precious reputation. There's a life growing inside of me. Our life." The silence between them was crushing. Around them, the restaurant continued its luxurious routine. Waiters passed between tables, serving expensive dishes, while lively conversations filled the room. But at their table, time seemed to have stopped. Adeyemi looked once more at the pregnancy test, as if hoping something would change if he stared at it long enough. After a few seconds, he spoke. "I need time to think. This is too much to process right now." What a complicated situation Ijeoma found herself in, and it wasn't over yet. There were still many surprises in this story. But before continuing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I also want to know, are you enjoying today's story? Comment below. With those words, he abruptly stood and left the restaurant in quick steps, not even bothering to look back. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to process everything that had just happened. Ijeoma was pregnant. The thought hammered in his head, repeating itself like an echo that wouldn't leave him alone. How could this have happened? They had been careful, he remembered that well. As he walked through the busy streets, his memories began to mix with anger and frustration. He stopped in front of a clothing store, the reflection in the windows showing a man different from the one he saw every day. The Adeyemi he knew always had control, always knew the next step to take. But now everything seemed out of reach. He looked at the sky, taking a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. His mind replayed Ijeoma's words, the pain in her eyes, the sound of her broken voice. He had been harsh, but what else could he have said? The life he had planned had no room for a child with a servant. It would be a scandal. He needed time to think. This would complicate everything. He thought of his family, the business, the people around him, and above all, the press that would destroy him as soon as they found out everything. The idea of losing control over his own life consumed him. As he continued to walk through the streets, he realized the phone in his hand was vibrating. It was a message. Reluctantly, he glanced at the screen, hoping it was Ijeoma. It was the old Bakari, his father. His father had a habit of always being on top of his son's business, and the message couldn't have been clearer. "We need to talk. The board is worried about the latest rumors." Adeyemi's stomach churned. He knew what that meant. He knew his father had probably already heard rumors about something being off. If he knew about Ijeoma, if he knew about the baby, his mind was in a whirlwind. What would he do? Everything seemed to be falling apart at once. He couldn't stop thinking about the fact that the woman he saw only as a servant, a meaningless fling, was now carrying his child as he wrestled with his internal turmoil. Back in the restaurant, Ijeoma was still seated at the table, unmoving. The pregnancy test remained untouched, as if it had frozen time. She stared at that small object as though it were the heaviest thing in the world. The silence around her felt deafening. The elegant restaurant, which once seemed like a place of tranquility, now felt suffocating. The tears she had been holding back began to fall slowly, one by one, soaking the napkin she was gripping in her hands. Her heart was shattered, and the pain of being rejected by Adeyemi, the man she thought cared for her, was overwhelming. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. "I will take care of this baby on my own," she murmured to herself in a trembling voice. "I don't need him. I never needed him." Ijeoma knew that the journey ahead would be difficult. Raising a child alone, especially as just a servant, would be an immense challenge. But she wouldn't let fear consume her. She had always been a strong woman, and now, more than ever, she would have to prove it to herself and to the world. As time seemed to drag on, she thought about how drastically things had changed. Just a few months ago, she never would have imagined being in this position. Adeyemi had entered her life unexpectedly. At first, it seemed like a fairy tale, the powerful man who fell for the humble servant. The nights they spent together were filled with passion and moments that Ijeoma believed meant something more. But now, everything seemed like an illusion, a lie she had told herself. To Adeyemi, she was just a fling, a temporary distraction. That much was clear from the cold words he had spoken at the restaurant. It was just an affair. She quickly wiped away her tears, straightening herself in the chair. There were decisions to be made, plans to be laid out. Despite everything, she couldn't afford to fall apart. If Adeyemi didn't want to take responsibility, she would. The life growing inside her was her priority and Not Adeyemi's disdain nor the challenges ahead could change that. Ijeoma stood up, took the pregnancy test, and carefully placed it in her bag. With her head held high and her heart still aching, she walked out of the restaurant. After that day, Ijeoma never showed up at the mansion again. No one knew where she was, there was no contact, nothing that could trace her. 5 years had passed since that day at the restaurant, and Ijeoma's life had changed completely. Now, she lived in a simple neighborhood, far from the luxury and grandeur that had once been part of her past. Among the modest buildings and the constant sound of sirens, Ijeoma found a new purpose in life. She raised her daughter Maria with all the love and dedication a single mother could offer. At 4 years old, Maria was a bundle of energy and curiosity, and with every smile, Ijeoma felt that all her struggles had been worth it. From the moment she arrived in that neighborhood, she knew the road would be tough, but she had never imagined how rewarding it would be to see her daughter growing up healthy and happy, even without the presence of her father, who now seemed like a distant memory. In that community, Ijeoma did something that kept her going even on the hardest days. She created a community center to help single mothers like herself, women who were also facing the harshness of life without the support of a partner. Even with limited resources, the Mothers and Families Support Center became a refuge for many women who, like her, fought every day to give their children a better future. The work was hard, but the gratitude she saw in the eyes of every mother who walked through those doors made it all easier. The community respected her, and Ijeoma went from being a lonely, devastated woman to a strong and inspiring leader. She didn't speak much about her past, about Maria's father, or the life she had left behind, but she knew she had made the right choice. Her focus now was her daughter and the work she was doing to transform the lives of so many others around her. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Adeyemi had expanded his real estate empire in ways no one could have imagined. His name was in all the papers, his face plastered on the covers of the most important business magazines in the country. He was the definition of success. Every move he made seemed precisely calculated, and every investment resulted in unimaginable profits. The people around him admired, respected, and feared him. But despite all the glory, something was missing. The success, the gala dinners, the luxury cars. All that had once seemed like the pinnacle of life now felt like an empty and dull routine. Adeyemi looked at himself in the mirror, dressed in the finest suits, and saw a powerful man, but a lonely one. He had tried to fill the void with parties and fleeting relationships, but none of those things gave him what he was truly seeking. In the quiet moments, when the world around him calmed, he thought of Ijeoma. Where could she be? What had happened to her? And the baby? Adeyemi never had the courage to look for her. It was easier to bury the past, to let time erase those memories. But unfortunately, no matter how much he tried, he couldn't. The emptiness in his life only grew as he realized that, despite all his success, there was something he could never buy. The peace that Ijeoma had surely found without him. Back in the poor neighborhood, Ijeoma continued her routine, dividing her time between the community center and caring for Maria. It was a simple life, but it was the life she had built with her own hands. She didn't need anything more, or at least, that's what she tried to convince herself. One day, while Adeyemi was in his office in the luxurious building that housed his company in Lagos, he found himself distracted. The contracts and documents in front of him suddenly seemed insignificant. He decided to check the international news for a break. As he scrolled through his computer, a local news article from a small town caught his attention. It was about the opening of a new community center, and the title mentioned that the place was helping hundreds of single mothers and disadvantaged families. Something in the title made him click on the article, without knowing why. When the page loaded and he saw the photo accompanying the story, his heart nearly stopped. There she was, Ijeoma, her face serious but illuminated by a faint smile, looking directly at the camera. Beside her, a little girl held her hand, and Adeyemi felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The girl had the same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning, the same shape of the face. The resemblance was undeniable, and the shock left him breathless. He was paralyzed, staring at the screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. "That child, it can't be," he murmured to himself, but the image didn't lie. That was his daughter Maria, whom he had never met, and whom he had ignored all these years. Adeyemi closed his eyes for a moment, trying to make sense of what he was feeling. Guilt, regret, shame. All these emotions swirled in his mind, forming a storm he couldn't control. Ijeoma had moved on. Not only had she raised their daughter on her own, but she had also built something incredible with the community center, helping so many others. She didn't need him, and that realization hit him with devastating force. Adeyemi clicked on the video accompanying the article and watched in silence. There she was, speaking to the audience about the importance of supporting mothers who face challenges alone, thanking the community for trusting her and for the opportunity to change lives. Adeyemi could barely hear what she was saying, her words echoing in his mind without truly sinking in. His focus was entirely on the little girl playing in the background as her mother spoke. Every movement she made tightened his chest. The way she smiled, how she looked around. It was as if he was watching a miniature version of himself. The initial shock was replaced by an overwhelming wave of regret. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice faltering. Suddenly, an urgency overtook him. He had to go there to see Ijeoma, to see Maria, to explain. But how could he explain? How could he justify 5 years of absence, 5 years of silence? Adeyemi grabbed his phone and, without hesitation, called his assistant. "Prepare the private jet for Gand. I need to be there as soon as possible." His voice was firm, but inside he was falling apart. What would he say when he saw her? How would his daughter react? Would Ijeoma even accept him back into her life? Or was it too late? These questions haunted him, but one thing was certain. He couldn't continue living this lie. Adeyemi's private jet landed in Gand on the morning of the big day. He had barely slept during the flight, his mind consumed by the weight of what he was about to do. Upon arrival, the drive to the community center seemed endless. The honking and frantic movement of the city only made him more anxious. When he finally reached the community center, Adeyemi saw the bustling crowd. Colorful balloons decorated the entrance, mothers with their children, volunteers handing out pamphlets, and in the background, a small setup with an improvised stage where Ijeoma was speaking. His heart tightened when he saw her. 5 years had passed, but she was even more beautiful, stronger, with a presence that radiated respect and confidence. She spoke passionately about the work of the center and the impact it would have on the lives of so many women, and the crowd listened intently. Adeyemi could hardly focus on her words. His eyes involuntarily searched for Maria, and then he saw her. The girl was playing with other children, running back and forth, laughing, spreading joy with every step. He stood there watching her and felt an indescribable emotion. For the first time, he was seeing his daughter in the flesh. A part of him, which he had denied for so long, was running around happily. Adeyemi felt a lump in his throat. How had he stayed away for so long? The guilt weighed him down, and the regret grew with each passing second. But he was here now, and he knew he had to do this. When Ijeoma's speech ended, she was surrounded by several people, all congratulating her on the success of the event. Adeyemi, standing at a distance, watched the scene with both pride and pain. She had built something grand without him. With sweaty hands and a racing heart, he took a deep breath and began walking toward her. Each step felt heavy, as if the weight of all those years of absence was pulling him back. He had no idea how Ijeoma would react to seeing him, but he was determined to face her. When Adeyemi finally approached, still trying to mentally prepare himself, Ijeoma looked up and saw him. Time seemed to freeze. The people around them continued talking, laughing, clapping, but for Ijeoma and Adeyemi, it felt as if only the two of them existed in that moment. "Adeyemi," she said incredulously. The way she pronounced his name made him feel the full impact of his presence there. Adeyemi tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. What could he possibly say? How could he begin to explain everything he had felt and denied for so long? Ijeoma, I had to come. I had to see you, he said, his voice low, almost pleading for understanding. But her gaze was cold, distant. She crossed her arms and took a step back, her posture rigid as if she was protecting herself. "You're 5 years too late," she replied, not hiding the hurt in her voice. He felt there was no softening that blow. Ijeoma had done everything on her own, and he knew it. "I know I made mistakes. I know I left you both. But I'm here now," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Ijeoma stared at him for a few seconds, as if evaluating whether to let him continue or simply turn her back and walk away. "And now you show up after 5 years without even trying to find out how we were? What do you want? I saw you in the news. I saw Maria," he said, briefly looking away, as if looking at her was too much to bear. "I needed to meet my daughter." That last sentence made Ijeoma's eyes flicker slightly, as if the words had struck her unexpectedly. But she didn't let the emotion show. "Do you think you can just show up and say you want to meet your daughter? Where have you been all these years, Adeyemi? You chose to abandon us." The silence that followed was crushing, as the little girl continued playing, unaware that just a few meters away, her father was struggling to find a place in the life that she and her mother had built without him. Realizing the situation was slipping out of his control, Adeyemi took a step forward, his hands trembling and his voice shaky. "Please, can we talk in private?" he pleaded, trying to maintain his composure in front of the crowd still celebrating the event. His eyes begged for a moment of privacy, away from the curious gazes and unspoken questions. Ijeoma hesitated for a moment, but her maternal instinct prevailed. She knew that what was at stake wasn't just their past, but Maria's future. With a heavy sigh, she nodded slightly, indicating for him to follow her to a quieter corner of the community center. The two walked in silence, and when they reached a more secluded spot, away from the people, she turned to face him, her arms still crossed in a defensive gesture. Adeyemi looked at the ground for a moment, trying to find the right words. He felt the weight of the past on his shoulders, as if every second spent by her side was a reminder of all the opportunities he had wasted. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I know I wronged you, I wronged Maria. But I'm here now, and I want to be part of my daughter's life. I already told you, it's not that simple. She doesn't know you. She doesn't know who you are. And I don't know who you are anymore either." Her words were harsh, but Adeyemi knew she was right. He had lost the right to claim anything in the family he had left behind. "I know it won't be easy," he responded quickly, desperate for her to hear him. "I'm not asking to fix everything at once. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to be the father she deserves. I was wrong, I was the worst man, but please don't take away this opportunity for me to try to make things right now." Ijeoma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the conversation. The Adeyemi she once knew was confident, controlling, and sometimes cold. But the man standing before her now seemed broken, vulnerable, and perhaps for the first time in all those years, truly remorseful. Part of her wanted to send him back to the plane and never see him again. The pain of abandonment was still there, alive as if it had all happened yesterday. But there was another part of her she couldn't ignore, telling her that maybe Maria deserved to know her father, even if he had failed in the past. "You don't understand, Adeyemi," she began, fighting back the tears that threatened to escape. "I've taken care of her alone all these years. I was there for every moment, every achievement, every hardship. You have no idea what we went through." Adeyemi felt the pain in her words and knew he couldn't undo what had already been done. But he couldn't give up. "I know. I left you alone when you needed me the most. And I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But I can't keep living like this, knowing my daughter is growing up without me. Please let me be part of her life. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now, just a chance to make things right, to earn your trust and hers over time." Ijeoma remained silent, torn. The anger that still burned in her chest was undeniable. "I'm going to need time," she finally said. "This won't be easy. And I'm not going to let you come and go from my daughter's life as you please. If you really want to be part of her life, you'll have to prove to me that you're here to stay. And that will take time." Adeyemi nodded, relieved that she hadn't rejected his offer outright, but aware that the road ahead would be long and full of obstacles. "I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes. Just let me try." Ijeoma simply nodded, saying nothing more. There was too much to think about, too much to process. In the weeks following that tense encounter, the two were forced to face truths they had avoided for years. Ijeoma was constantly on guard. How could she trust him after everything he had done? With each meeting, she questioned whether she was making a mistake by letting Adeyemi get close to their daughter. Initially, Maria thought he was just an acquaintance of her mother, perhaps a friend. But as the meetings became more frequent and the conversations more serious, the girl began to sense that there was something more. Something familiar that she couldn't fully understand. Adeyemi made sure to be cautious in his interactions. He didn't want to scare her, didn't want to force a relationship before the time was right. But every time he looked at the girl, he felt a mixture of joy and pain. Joy for finally seeing her up close, but pain for having missed so many important moments. When Maria, with her typical curiosity, asked her mother who the man was who now appeared more often, Ijeoma's heart tightened. She knew this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared to deal with the consequences. "He's your father," Ijeoma replied, her voice soft but cautious. Maria's eyes widened, and the revelation caused an immense confusion in her mind. How could that man, whom she barely knew, be her father? She had spent her whole life alongside her mother, believing their family was complete as it was. Now everything seemed to be upside down. She began observing Adeyemi with new eyes, trying to understand what this meant. Did he love her? Would he leave again? The questions swirled in her head, but she didn't have the courage to ask them aloud. Ijeoma, on the other hand, watched her daughter with a mix of worry and sadness. She knew that sooner or later, Maria would need to have a deeper conversation about what it meant to have Adeyemi in their lives. But how do you explain something so complex to a child? Meanwhile, Adeyemi tried not to push. Slowly, he began to gain small spaces in Maria's world. A shy smile here, a curious question there. The tension between Ijeoma and Adeyemi remained palpable, and despite both their efforts, the scars of the past were always present. As the weeks passed, the relationship between Maria and Adeyemi began to develop, though timidly. Small moments of connection appeared, but confusion still hung in the air. Maria was beginning to understand that this man was her father, but what that meant was still far from clear to her. As Adeyemi struggled to build a relationship with his daughter and regain Ijeoma's trust, the unexpected happened. His family, especially his father, discovered Maria's existence. For Bakari, who had always been a rigid businessman obsessed with the family's reputation, this news hit like a bomb. The Bakari family had an immaculate image, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and control. Nothing in their entire legacy could tarnish that image, and the patriarch had always made that clear to everyone around him, especially to Adeyemi, the heir to the entire empire. He expected his son to follow the same path. No flaws, no scandals, no mistakes. But now there was a granddaughter that no one knew about. A child born from a relationship outside the acceptable standards for the family. That afternoon, Bakari didn't wait. He went straight to Adeyemi's office, who had just returned from a trip, without warnings or formalities. When he entered, his firm footsteps echoed through the large marble hall, and his cold gaze already indicated that the conversation would be anything but friendly. Adeyemi, who was reviewing some documents, looked up as his father walked in, immediately sensing the tension in the air. Bakari approached his son's desk and, without preamble, said the words Adeyemi had been dreading to hear. "So it's true," he said, his voice firm and heavy with disapproval. "That child, is she your daughter?" Adeyemi took a deep breath, feeling the pressure mounting on his shoulders. "Yes, father. Maria is my daughter," he replied, his voice firm but with a slight tremor. Bakari clenched his fists and narrowed his eyes, as if he was about to explode. Do you have any idea what this means for our family? What were you thinking? This kind of scandal could ruin everything we've built. The press will destroy our image. How could you be so irresponsible? Adeyemi felt the anger bubbling inside him. His entire life, he had followed his father's rules, upheld the family image, sacrificed parts of himself to meet expectations. But this time, he couldn't do the same. He was dealing with something far greater than business or reputation. He was dealing with his own daughter, a life he had neglected for far too long. "I'm not going to deny my daughter, father. Not anymore," Adeyemi said. Bakari looked at him as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're willing to throw everything away for a mistake? A child that should never have existed, the daughter of a maid." Adeyemi stood up from his chair, his eyes fixed on his father, and for the first time in his life, he felt the need to confront the man who had always controlled everything. "Zoe is not a mistake," Adeyemi said, his voice filled with restrained anger. "She is my daughter, and I will do what is right by her, even if it means defying you or anyone else." Bakari wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by his own son. He looked at Adeyemi with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You're willing to ruin our family, our legacy, for a child you barely know?" he asked, trying to maintain control of the situation. But Adeyemi didn't back down. "Yes, I am. Because I'm not going to live with this guilt anymore. I'm not going to hide who I am or who my daughter is. If you can't understand that, then I don't know what else to say," he replied, his voice heavy with emotion. Bakari shook his head in disbelief. "You were always the son I trusted most to carry on our legacy. But now you're willing to throw it all away for a woman and a child who don't belong to our family, who don't belong in this world." Adeyemi felt a pang of pain hearing that. He knew his father's approval was something he had always sought. But now, that approval no longer carried the same weight. Maria and Ijeoma were his priority. "They are my family now, father. And if you can't accept that, then we will go our separate ways." Bakari, seeing that he wouldn't be able to convince Adeyemi, took a step back, his eyes still filled with frustration and disapproval. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Adeyemi. And when everything falls apart, don't come to me for help." With those words, he turned and left the office, leaving Adeyemi alone but more certain than ever. He had made his choice, and this time there would be no turning back. Ijeoma felt exhausted. That afternoon, as she watched Maria play in the small room they had lovingly set up, Ijeoma felt the weight of all these emotions pressing on her chest. She knew that sooner or later, she would need to have an honest conversation with her daughter. Sitting on the couch with her hands folded in her lap, she called Maria, trying to hide the fatigue in her voice. "Come here, darling. Mommy needs to talk to you," she said as the curious girl approached, her eyes filled with innocent wonder. Maria climbed onto the couch next to Ijeoma and snuggled in, sensing that something important was about to happen. "What is it, Mommy?" she asked, her voice sweet and curious. Ijeoma took a deep breath, searching for the right words. How could she explain something so complicated to a child? How could she explain that the man who had been visiting recently, the man she was beginning to recognize, was her father? Ijeoma ran her hand through her daughter's hair, trying to buy time as her mind struggled to organize her thoughts. "Maria, do you remember Adeyemi, the man who has been visiting us?" Maria nodded, her little eyes fixed on her mother, trying to figure out where this conversation was going. He's your father, Maria," Ijeoma finally said, her voice soft but tense. Maria blinked a few times, absorbing the words. "My father?" she repeated, as if the idea had never crossed her mind before. And indeed, it hadn't. To Maria, life had always consisted of her mother and the people around the community center. The figure of a father had never been discussed. "He's my real father?" she asked, now with a spark of curiosity in her eyes, trying to process the new information. Ijeoma felt a lump in her throat. She knew that, for Maria, the idea of having a father was exciting, something all the other children seemed to have, but for her, it had always been a silent absence. "Yes, dear," Ijeoma replied, feeling her heart tighten as she spoke. "He's your real father." Maria stayed quiet for a few seconds, as if trying to piece together a puzzle in her young mind. "So, now I'm going to have a father, Mommy?" The question came with a mix of hope and confusion, and Ijeoma felt the world stop for a moment. What could she say? How could she give a definitive answer when even she didn't know what the future held? She saw the joy in Maria's eyes, but she also knew the situation was far more complicated than that. I don't know, Maria," Ijeoma replied, her voice trembling slightly. "He's trying, sweetheart. He wants to be here. But these things take time." Ijeoma felt a tear slide down her cheek but quickly wiped it away, trying to stay calm in front of her daughter. Having a father isn't something that just happens all of a sudden. It's something that's built, little by little, and he's trying to do that now. Maria frowned, clearly confused. "Is he going to stay with us, Mommy? Is he going to live here?" Ijeoma shook her head, knowing the explanation would be difficult. "No, he's not going to live here, my love. But he wants to be part of your life. I just need a little more time to figure out how that's going to work." Maria looked at her mother for a few seconds, silent, then simply nodded, as if trying to accept the idea. Ijeoma hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility grow heavier. She didn't want Maria to get hurt, didn't want her daughter to create expectations that Adeyemi might not be able to fulfill. But at the same time, she knew Maria deserved the chance to know her father. She deserved that opportunity, even if it caused fear and uncertainty for Ijeoma. The doubts about Adeyemi's true intentions still lingered in her mind, but the desire to protect Maria was stronger than anything. As Maria returned to playing, Ijeoma found herself looking toward the future with apprehension. She knew that the coming weeks, maybe months, would be crucial. Adeyemi would have to prove not only to her but, more importantly, to Maria that he was there to stay. And that uncertainty was what kept her up at night, wondering if she had made the right choice in letting him back into their lives. The invitation to lunch with the Bakari family came unexpectedly. Adeyemi had spent weeks trying to earn Ijeoma's trust and build a relationship with Maria, and now he felt the next step was to introduce them officially to his family. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew his father, Bakari, still hadn't fully accepted the situation, and the atmosphere would be tense. Even so, he decided to take the risk. When Adeyemi mentioned the idea to Ijeoma, she hesitated. The memory of the pain and abandonment was still very fresh, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the family that, in some way, had also been responsible for everything that had happened. But when she looked at Maria, who was excited about the prospect of spending more time with her father, Ijeoma relented. She would do it for Maria, no matter how hard it was for her. On the day of the lunch, Ijeoma prepared carefully. It wasn't just a matter of appearance, but of mindset. She needed to be ready for anything. On the way to the Bakari house, in the luxurious neighborhood where Adeyemi had grown up, Ijeoma felt the nervousness growing. She looked at Maria in the back seat, who wore an innocent smile and was curious about what was to come. "Mommy, is Grandpa Bakari nice?" Maria asked, unaware of the complexity of that relationship. Ijeoma hesitated before responding. "We'll find out together, darling," she replied with a light but forced smile. When they arrived, the contrast was evident. The Bakari house was imposing, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and a facade that exuded wealth and power. Ijeoma felt out of place but tried to keep her composure. Adeyemi was waiting for them at the door, visibly nervous. He smiled as he saw Maria running toward him, arms outstretched. "Hi, Daddy," she shouted, with the innocence that disarmed any situation. Adeyemi picked her up and hugged her, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Ijeoma, however, stayed a little behind, her eyes taking in every detail around her. As they entered the house, they were greeted by Adeyemi's mother, who welcomed them politely but distantly. Adeyemi's father, Bakari, was seated at the table, observing everything with a cold stare. He stood up to greet them, but the atmosphere was far from friendly. The tension was palpable from the beginning. As everyone sat down for lunch, Ijeoma felt her discomfort growing. Maria, however, seemed completely unaware of it all. She chatted with Adeyemi and the other family members with the ease of a child who doesn't yet understand the complexities of adult relationships.